Hi, and welcome to America at its Best. My name is Rebecca Painter, and I'll be your host for today's show. Before we get started on today's show, I want to offer you a bit of self-promotion, if you will. I hope you have checked your inboxes because there are a couple of really great short videos that we recorded live from SPN's 29th annual meeting a couple of weeks ago. We were able to catch up with some of the leaders who are on the ground making big things happen. So please keep an eye out for those, and there are a few more still coming your way in the weeks to come. So keep an eye out for those. In the meantime, we are reserving these live shows when really big things are happening. And I have to tell you, today's guest, Randy Hicks from the Georgia Center for Opportunity, is on the verge of something huge that could happen for our country. They are on the verge of fundamentally changing the welfare system as we know it. That's right, fundamentally changing the complex, crazy welfare system as we know it. We'll bring Randy on in just a few minutes, but first, I'd like to share a video that his team put together to remind us a little bit more about the problem that Randy and his team are trying to solve.
I started out a victim of domestic violence. That really just propelled me to need housing. I've never lived in public housing until recently. I've always paid regular rent. And it just was a struggle after leaving. I had never even had to worry about rent being in a two-parent home. But when I was on my own, the rent increase was just astronomical. I was actually offered full-time employment with the state of Georgia, which definitely gave me a raise increase, where I was fortunate enough to actually finally break over the income barrier of just being in poverty and, struggling month to month. With me moving here, I was excited. I was actually grateful. I was excited until, recently when I found out the amount of the increase in my rent. I moved my employment, I moved everything out here, and now I'm at risk of losing everything. I got the increase, which I thought it would be a cap on my rent, but it wasn't. I'm actually paying a mortgage rate, which is like almost $1,000 for rent for public housing. It's no real help if you're in my position to where you're in that medium where you've increased over the standard rate for family and you pretty much are stuck in this wealth gap. Housing is too expensive, but you only make a certain amount, so you're never going to reach that limit. You have help, but then if you help yourself, you're faced with adversities that you shouldn't be faced with. You're not able to provide for your family. That's devastating. It's devastating. I suffer from anxiety. It causes stress. It causes severe depression. You don't know the depths of homelessness until you slept in your car, or you don't know the actual effect of sleeping in your car and being faced with those positions. And sometimes lawmakers have never been in those positions, so they make decisions based on what they've experienced. So that's really my hope and dream, to be able to have a voice, to make that change.
Thanks, Alyssa. Let's bring Randy Hicks on to tell us a little bit more about Joelle. Hey, Randy.
Here I am. Hey, Rebecca.
Hi. Randy, that was a moving video about a woman who, the system started out with good intentions, helping her get back on her feet. And then she, became gainfully employed, but so gainfully employed that she couldn't afford to live in public housing anymore.
Yeah.
What's happening here?
Yeah, well, One of the things I just want to say right away about Joelle that I think has inspired us and moved us. Here's just if I could sum up that story. So she moves from one state to another to escape an abusive situation because she's a responsible mom who wants to be both a protector and a provider for her children. She immediately gets a job and then is homeless as a result and finds herself living in a car. It's a remarkable story. And the reason why it happens is because we have in America not a welfare system. And you and I have talked about this before. I've likely talked to some of the people watching this right now. We don't have a welfare system. We never have had a system. We have a mishmash of programs that have been developed over many, many decades, each of which are designed to deal with separate problems and have very specific eligibility requirements. So there's a point at which you're eligible, and there's a point at which you're not. Well, when those programs stack up high and suddenly you get a slight increase in pay, you may find that while you gained annual income of say $5,000, you netted $10,000 in losses. So those kinds of things happen all the time with the system as it is.
What a disincentive to even find work. It's incredible. So your friends, you and your colleagues at Georgia Center for Opportunity have developed a tool that could change everything. Tell us what this tool can do for people.
Yeah, so basically what it allows us to do for the first time is see what happens to benefits and your qualifications or your eligibility as your income rises. So again, there are points at which along your income progression that you're eligible or ineligible for various programs. What we can now see are benefits that stack, how they stack, and where cliffs come. Sometimes you have multiple cliffs hitting at one time, which can really hit somebody hard economically. And of course, because people are rational economic beings, they'll say, well, I don't want to be homeless next week or next month, so I'm going to turn down that pay raise or I'm going to turn down that job.
Well, let's back up for a second. It's such a tangled web the federal government has created that, again, maybe was well-intentioned, but isn't actually helping many, many Americans. In fact, it's just killing people like Joelle. So have you seen any interest from our friends in the Fed, or friends or foes, anyone in the federal government around something like this?
Yeah, so there are a lot of people interested in it. I will say this, I think one of the more interesting discoveries for us early on when we had just developed it, basically only for Georgia, was that we were invited to Washington, D.C. to be part of a meeting with federal welfare agency leaders, people with great experience. Inside that room that day was a person from the federal agency basically responsible for economic modeling. And somebody asked that person, well, has anybody done any economic modeling around the benefits cliff and marriage penalties and all these things? And this person said, this person from the agency responsible for economic modeling said, well, no, that's really complicated stuff. Nobody's ever done that. And of course, the host who invited us to be there and had known what we had done said, well, this might be a good time to hear from GCO. And so my colleagues at that point got to present what we had developed. It's a game changer. Again, people haven't had it. So there's real interest in it. There are people all over the country using it. So yeah, I mean, there's interest definitely beyond just a partisan divide.
Well, so this is what makes me excited about this. And this is why I wanted you on the show today, Randy. You've got political interest, and you can tell us a little bit more if you're allowed to share some of the folks who have been interested on this in different states and different levels of government. But you've also figured out how to make this tool valuable to various major nonprofits around the country who are trying to help people get back on their feet and stay employed. You're also having series of meetings with some of the world's largest employers because they are struggling to keep people employed because as they continue their career paths, they lose their welfare benefits. So you're not just targeting politicians, you're bringing together community leaders, nonprofits, and some of the world's biggest employers to figure this thing out, which frankly, we need more of in this country around some of the biggest problems we're facing. So tell us more about those audiences.
Yeah, so this was a bit of a surprise. I'd love to tell you we were all geniuses and could see this on the horizon. But essentially what happened was we were a CEO from a very large direct service nonprofit in South Carolina. They have 180 caseworkers. They work directly with welfare recipients at multiple sites across the state of South Carolina. She called me and said, I think that benefits cliff model can help us in case management. So now they have the system embedded in their own website, and their case managers are helping their clients, people who receive welfare benefits, anticipate where cliffs are coming and start to imagine ways and develop ways to get past those cliffs and provide them with the kind of counsel they need to really succeed and perhaps get on a career and income progression that will make them independent. So they might say, then you get this piece of education or you get that training and you can leapfrog that benefits cliff in a matter of months. So those are the kinds of conversations. Well, once we had that, we thought, I wonder if a business could use that in a similar way. Could they use it essentially to help guide their employees and reduce and help reduce turnover? For those businesses who hire people who receive benefits, they typically have high churn rates, right? Mm-hmm. And so we were a little surprised, though, to have our first conversation about this idea to occur with one of the largest employers in the world. I'm not going to name them now. There's a long way to go. Conversations are early, but it's a great conversation. It's a great thought that a major corporation and other corporations like them could use it to serve their employees and reduce their turnover.
So on one hand, you've got some politicians out there finally exposing the problem and realizing this mess that we're in on a whole new level. On the other hand, you've got nonprofit leaders showing interest, business leaders showing interest. What do you think is next? We had someone, for example, send a question in before the show started. And by the way, if you guys have questions, stick them in the chat. We'll address them as we go here. But the question was, how do we get this thing in more states than just Georgia? Sounds like you've already got it in more states than Georgia, but tell us a little bit about where it is and how many more you need.
That's right. So we have it in 9 states right now. There's a lot of data collection involved in this because you're basically capturing eligibility rules all the way down to the county level for all these different programs. And when I say all these different programs, we have scores of welfare programs in the United States. Our system has the 16 largest that make up about 90% of all welfare payments. We're going to add a couple more here in the not too distant future to refine it a little bit, but it's basically the welfare system in terms of most of the payments. So to capture data takes money and time. So we've added 9 states at this point. We're having a conversation with leaders in one state where the Secretary of Health and Human Services is saying he wants to use it to really advocate for reform with the state legislature and with the governor. They're likely, or they're considering, paying us to actually gather all that data. But we've got a lot of other states to do. So there's just cost associated with it.
So you're in 9, you could get to all 50. So let's say it's in the hands of politicians and they do what they do, which they might take a little bit of time because nothing fast usually happens in government, state or federal. On the other hand, as we said earlier, you've got the business people, you've got some of the nonprofit leaders. So what happens to demand for some of these welfare programs, even as the government people are trying to figure out what to do, if you can get this to take off in the business and nonprofit community?
Yeah, Rebecca, this is the most exciting thing about this. You know, we've worked at this intersection of public policy and community for a long time. We don't do one or the other, we do both. But we've never had a situation like this where a tool we've created for public policy to drive reforms can be used at the community level. So just think about it. We've now got this tool we developed to help us drive policy reforms, but we're also using it now to reduce the demand for the very programs we're trying to reform. I mean, it really is, it's just an exciting thing to even be able to say. And the reason is, this is kind of what we say in the State Policy Network, right? In our network of state-based think tanks. We tell state leaders, don't sit around waiting for the federal government to act. You have power at the state level to take action. But we also are telling local leaders, don't sit around for state leaders or federal governments to act. You can go ahead and get work done. You can make a change. You can use this tool to start to find ways to on-ramp people into the workforce. People who know, just like you and I do, that a job is more than just a source of income. It's a source of pride, purpose, and belonging. This is the thing that gets lost among government officials, but something that people in communities, business leaders, nonprofit leaders get. They live it, they understand it.
Yeah, and they can circumvent the government handouts and help their employees.
They just don't need to wait. That's right.
Yeah. That's incredible. So now, for the politicians who are working to do something about this, someone asked me this the other day. I thought it was a great question and pretty obvious, right? We think about welfare, and so much of that comes from the federal government. So what can states actually do about this? Do they really have any power if they were to take action?
They do. That's a great question, and it's a very aware question. The reality is that these are federal programs. Many of them are block granted to the state. Block granted programs typically provide greater flexibility than other programs, but there's flexibility in most of these programs. So there's enough to make changes to refine the system and make it more work friendly. But I would add a couple of things that can be done fairly easily. I'm not saying it's not hard work, but when I say fairly easily, without too much resistance from the federal government, and as you know, we don't exactly have a friendly federal administration right now when it comes to issues like this. But one thing they can do is streamline programs, get them all under one roof. And another thing they can do is not just get them under one roof, thereby eliminating a lot of waste and duplication. They can also wed those welfare programs to workforce programs. This may sound crazy to you, but right now, as far as we can tell, we're having conversations with them, there's only one state in the country that actually thought it'd be a good idea to wed welfare programs or bring welfare programs and workforce programs under the same roof. You and I are saying, seems to make a lot of sense. You want to fight poverty? A job is a heck of a way to do it. And yet only one state's done that, it's Utah. That's another thing they can do. And then I'll add one other big one, and there are more, but one of the things we can do is audit programs at the state level to reduce fraud, to make sure people receiving assistance actually are eligible. But that helps you start to reduce costs, maybe smooth out some cliffs, and bring about the kinds of changes that allow for a work-centric welfare system at the state level.
Randy, that's so helpful. And it seems like we all have our own perceptions of what's wrong with the welfare system or the welfare web. You said it's not a system. You're right. And I think we all probably know someone or know someone who is a victim similar to Joelle, but we don't really stop and think of it in those human terms very often. So often we talk about a tax cut or some wonky policy that's going to solve the problems. And somehow you and your team figured out it goes a lot deeper than that, and it's more complicated. And you've got to show holistically this problem that we're facing in order to start looking towards solutions. Tell me a little bit about how your team came up with that approach, because I suspect that it's not just Joelle that you guys talked to get yourself here and to inspire this tool that was built.
Yeah, no, that's right. I mentioned earlier that we work at that intersection of public policy and community. And the reason is just this is a fundamental belief of ours, and I think it is probably not just for you, but almost all the people who are on this call listening to us right now. But what's most important is what happens in civil society. The end of public policy is a human life. At the end of it is a human life, right? We care about public policies because they impact human beings. So we've engaged in community work because it's there that lives are formed, and when things go badly, it's where lives are transformed. So we're engaged in that way. But it was being engaged in that way that we started hearing more and more stories from people. It felt a little anecdotal initially, but it started getting bigger and bigger. And so we just wanted to understand it. And nobody had ever created anything that showed us how this all worked. So we just desperately wanted to understand it from a public policy perspective because of the people on the ground we saw impacted by it. In fact, Rebecca, can I tell you one other story? Some people may have heard this before. I think this is just a dramatic example. A couple of years ago, an Atlanta businessman invited a single mom into his office on a Friday afternoon to give her a promotion and a pay raise. She was excited. She was in tears. She was so excited, proud of herself, and went home excited. That was Friday afternoon. On Monday, she came back and turned it all down, also in tears, because she was going to lose so much more in government assistance. So those are the kinds of stories, Rebecca, that we were hearing. And it just drove us to want to understand why these things keep happening. And now we have this model.
So Randy, let me make sure I'm tracking with you on the vision here and what has happened versus where you're going.
Yeah.
You've got 9 states set up where you are engaging with various politicians at all levels, nonprofit leaders who try to keep people gainfully employed and away from the cliff that will just drop them far down to the ground. And not just employers, but some of the world's largest employers are interested in being a part of this. And from where I sit, I'm thinking, gosh, you're in 9 states now. If you can get to 20 states and then 40 states and then 50 states, if just a couple of these big employers get their hands in this in big ways and get excited about it and use it, if just a few of these politicians can be heroes and actually figure something out based on what they're seeing here, right? If just a handful of these nonprofits can change enough lives, and there's a lot of ifs here, but this is our world and these things start to come together, everything really could change. Is that the reality of where you are today?
Yeah, I mean, that's the vision. I mean, once you have more and more nonprofits, this nonprofit that we're working with currently, and the other nonprofits that are looking to use it as well, are excited about it because it's given them a way to help people, right, very directly and understand their world and help their clients understand their own situations well. Well, what that means is that suddenly you have all these nonprofits who have a clear understanding of the problem and how the system is created in a way that's harmful. Now start adding employers who are starting to recognize how messed up the system is as well, that it's harming people, that it's driving employee churn rates, right? That starts creating a groundswell for change that's very important. In addition to talking to politicians, right? It's just we've got to continue to raise awareness. The way I look at this is it's not a 1-year thing, it's not a 2-year thing. We're in this for the long haul, but we're excited about the conversations we're having and the possibilities of achievement here, of having an impact on people all over the country.
And Randy, at a time where everything feels very, very polarized, you seem to have brought a lot of people together who can't deny this problem. I mean, who would not want to solve this problem? It just seems insane. So kudos to you and your team for getting us to this point. Now, I imagine you guys need to raise a lot of money in a short period of time. I think you said $1 million in the next month. How can our viewers help you if anybody wants to be a part of this? What do you need?
Yeah, so we are raising $1 million over the next month. And basically that's going to go to basically upgrade the system to handle more users. Just so you know, right now, this is, if you go to the benefits.org website, benefitscliffs.org website, you'll see we have 9 states there, and you can kind of work through and see how the system works. It's on an Excel workbook. That's where all this data is, thousands upon thousands of calculations. So we need to upgrade the system to make it more accessible to more users. We need to expand our capacity to both collect and maintain data. That's how we're going to add states. We can't add states. We don't have the capacity to do so. And then to market the product to groups across the country. So far, all this expansion has basically happened word of mouth. I mean, it's conversations like this, yes, but we've done nothing really to do, nothing in the way of true marketing.
Mm-hmm. Well, Randy, big thank you to you and to your team for what you guys have done. We will be keeping an eye on this because, again, it seems to have the potential to take off if you guys continue on this trajectory and can raise the money you need. So to all of you watching, I rarely ask you to give specifically to the people who come on our show. But in this case, I'm asking you, please check out GCO's website. Give. This could be huge. We're at a place where if they can scale it up and continue to decrease demand for these federal and state welfare programs, everything could change. And we all know that while politicians ultimately pass these laws, it's people, community leaders, business people who end up being hands-on to solve these problems. And Randy's got those people interested. So please help us continue to get those folks interested, and we can do some big things together. Now, I was just about to close, but I got a question come in from Ed. So hang with us if you still have a couple more minutes. I know that Randy's got to run to the airport soon because he's going to bring this idea to a big group of donors in a few hours. But Ed Johnson, Ed, it's so good to hear from you. I'm glad you're back on the show. Ed's wondering, Randy, if you know who's looking at the economics of the welfare web to see what bringing the web under one roof in the States could save while providing more effective services. And I think you were speaking to this a little bit earlier.
Yes. So that's something we're very specifically looking at. And we actually would love to have more people looking at that. At this point, when we started doing, once we had developed the welfare cliff model and could kind of see how things were operating, we immediately started also thinking about what are the reforms that could make it less wasteful, so that we can smooth out some of the cliffs and weed out waste and fraud and all those kinds of things. And combining a number of programs under one roof, engaging in case management are things we're looking at. Calculating the cost at this point, we can't tell you what all the savings will be at this point, but that's where we're headed. It's a great question.
Thanks, Ed, and thanks for your answer, Randy. Well, with that, again, please consider giving to this very important project. If you'd like to be connected with Randy to learn more, let me know and I'll connect you with him. Or if you'd like to talk more with me about it, I'm happy to do that anytime. Thank you all for tuning in. Thank you for all that you make possible. It's ideas like these that would never happen without you and your support. And Randy, thank you for your time. Have a safe flight and good luck when you go share this with a big group in a few hours. We're rooting for you.
Thank you very much. And thank you for having me on and your very kind and encouraging words, Rebecca.
No, we're excited. All right, we'll see you guys soon. Bye.
Bye.